ecclesiastical complex at Kilmalkeldar is definitely one of the most impressive historical sites in Dingle. In addition to the church with its magnificent doorway, the so-called alphabet stone, the sundial, the ogham stone and a large stone cross, there are many other parts of the complex. These include an oratory, 2 buildings, one called either St. Brendan's house or the priest's house, and the other the Chancellor's house, a holy well, a leacht, bullan stones, and various other things. A word of warning, it was not possible to get access to St. Brendan's house or the well, perhaps because work was being done there, though this is something that changes. Furthermore, the complex is spread over 10 acres or 4 hectares. Most of it is within the wall enclosing the modern graveyard. However, the 2 houses, the well and other elements are not. As might be expected from a monastic site in the Dingle peninsula in Corca Duibhne, Kilmalkeldar is associated with St. Brendan. However, as can be seen from its name, it was founded by another figure, one whom the saint is named after, Cill Maoilchéadair. The latter seems to have been from Ulster. According to the annals, or more precisely the martyrology of Dingle, he was the son of Ronan, son of the king of Ulla, and a descendant of the legendary leacht, reputed to have been a king of Ireland in the 1st century AD. Maoilchéadair is also said to have died in 636. The site must have been founded before this time. Most of the site, notably the Romanesque church, dates from the 12th century onwards. However, there are some fragments which probably date from earlier periods. These include the ogham stone, the oratory, and the alphabet stone. Interestingly, for something which grew out of one of the many monastic sites founded in the 7th century, with a large Romanesque church being built in the 12th, and which was still in use in 1622 and possibly 1756, there are not many records about it. The date of its building was not recorded. During the medieval period, there are some references to it, such as the village of Kilmalkeldar being fined in 1298 for the escape of prisoners. Also during this period, the rectory of Kilmalkeldar was the prebend of the Chancellor of Art. This meant that the latter was granted the revenues of Kilmalkeldar. He also probably lived in the building called the Chancellor's house whenever he was visiting. Overall, for such an important site, there is remarkably little information about it. While most people's vision of the Dingle Peninsula was that it was very poor, this is not exactly true. It was not always this case. It may have been so in the 18th and 19th centuries, but it was not necessarily so in the medieval period. At this time, Dingle was an expanding port responsible for a lot of trade with Spain and France and home to many wealthy merchants. Therefore, at certain periods, the Chancellor of Art may have obtained a very decent income from Kilmalkeldar. Indeed, the size of the Chancellor's house points to this. It is also worth pointing out that despite being seen as a bastion of Irishness, in the medieval period, Dingle Peninsula was heavily settled by the Anglo-Normans, including the Earls of Desmond, the Fitzmaurices, the Knights of Kerry, and lesser nobility such as the Fereters. Most of the peninsula was in the hands of those who would later become known as the Old English. In the 16th and 17th centuries, all of Ireland would pass through a period of often violent and bitter changes. The Dingle Peninsula suffered during this time, with many of the Old English elites losing their lands. However, it seems that Kilmalkeldar survived these tumults reasonably well. At least in 1622, it still seems to have been functioning. Indeed, it may even have reached the 18th century as a working church. Eventually, however, it would fall into ruin. Fortunately for us, it is still in a reasonable condition. Let us now look at some of the individual parts of the complex. It's perhaps better to start with some of the oldest parts, the ogham stone, the sundial and the alphabet stone. These may be remnants from the beginnings of the ecclesiastical settlement, or at least its early years. The ogham stone can be found on a path in front of the church. It is 1.83 meters in height. The ogham inscription on it reads, Anna Malia Inbir Marki Brochan. This means the name, or possibly the soul, of Inbir, son of Brochan. There is also a possible earlier partial inscription on the other side of the stone, which reads Anna Marmaki. Unusually, there is a hole on the top of the ogham stone, something which is very rare. The sundial is perhaps the jewel of the site. Now near the ogham stone, in the not-so-distant past, somewhat unbelievably, it seems to have been used as a headstone for a modern grave. It was moved on a number of occasions before being settled in its present position. It is 1.23 meters high, and both the shaft and the upper section have a smooth finish. The upper section is quite intricate. It contains a circular hole called a gnome hole in the middle of the top edge. On the one side, double or triple lines run out from this hole and divide the surface into 4 sections. These lines end at 5 semicircles. All of this is outlined by semicircular design. A small rod would have been placed in the hole. This would cast a shadow on the different sections, thereby marking the passage of time during the day. On the other side, the upper part contains another design consisting of intersecting arcs of circles forming a cross of arcs. The latter is believed by some to have been a symbol of pilgrimage, and it is worth noting that Kilmalkeldar is actually very close to a pilgrimage route to Mount Brandon, now called the Saints' Road. Both sides of the shaft also contain engravings. These consist of carved lines running along the shaft and ending in what are called motifs. These motifs or designs are different on the 2 sides. The alphabet stone is fascinating. It is 1.22 meters high and is now located inside the church beside the chancel arch. On one side the stone has DNI carved in it, presumably a contraction of the Latin word Domini, or Lord, as well as a later inscription consisting of the Latin alphabet, hence its name. Based on the styles of the writing, it has been suggested that this dates from the second half of the 6th century. In other words, it was probably carved during the early years of the site. The other side contains a Latin cross with what are called scroll terminals. In other words, the ends of the cross are curled. Part of the stone is broken, and some of the carvings have been lost. It's hard to imagine what it would originally have been like. While it is beautiful now, it was probably even more so. Finally, near the ogham stone on the sundial is a large stone cross. It's about 2.5 meters high and contains a simpler rectangular design on one side. In addition, archaeologists have discovered that the cross is around 4 meters high in total, as just under 2 meters are below ground. Now it's time to move on to the church itself. It is magnificent, especially the main doorway. This has many similarities with Cormac's chapel in Cashel. Since it dates from a similar time, it is very likely there was some link between the two. Indeed, some believe that Kilmalkeldar was actually based on a former chapel. Due to the ecclesiastical connection between Kilmalkeldar and Ardfert, one wonders, did one of these influence the other? It's hard to know for certain, since Ardfert was rebuilt in the 13th century, and little remains of the earlier Romanesque church except for its beautiful Romanesque doorway. An interesting conundrum indeed. As was common, the church is divided into a chancel and nave. The nave is bigger, as it is where the congregation would gather. It is reasonably well preserved, apart from the roof, which is long gone. It measures 8.28 meters by 9.4 meters. Its walls are made from sandstone. The nave is entered through a magnificent Hiberno-Romanesque doorway. As in the case of constructions of this type, this doorway is framed by elaborate carvings. To use a technical term, it is round-headed and has 3 orders. In other words, it is arched and has 3 highly decorative indented arches. These are intricately carved and, like elsewhere in the church, contain anthropomorphic heads. Inside the church, the doorway between the nave and the chancel is of 2 orders. In other words, it contains 2 indented carved arches. Looking at both arches close up, various other details can be found. In addition, 3 decorative stones called finials can be found above the gables of the church, again similar to Cormac's chapel. The chancel is smaller than the nave. It measures 5.7 meters by 5.1 meters externally and 4.95 meters by 3.53 meters internally. Like the nave, its walls are well preserved. However, it seems to have been built later than the nave. Burials within the nave have raised the floor level. There is also an overground tomb within it. It is lit by a window which is now somewhat damaged. Indeed, this window is associated with a tradition that whoever climbs through it will receive good luck, marry within a year, or go to heaven when they die. It's worth spending time in both the chancel and the nave, not only for the doorway or the alphabet stone, because, looking closely at it, one can see a lot of beautiful details, such as animal heads and lots of beautiful carvings, or simply to slip away from the current day and admire the craftsmanship and skill of Gaelic Ireland. Also part of the complex are an oratory, St. Brendan's house, and the Chancellor's house, none of which I was able to visit. St. Brendan's house seems to have been undergoing building works when I visited. It is in a separate field from the main church, and the gate into this field was locked with barbed wire in the gate to prevent people from climbing over. Hopefully, when the necessary construction work is completed, it will be open again. The oratory is a small rectangular dry stone building measuring approximately 3.3 meters by 3.06 meters externally. It's around 50 meters away from the church. The walls are less than a meter thick, while the roof is built from flat flagstones resting on the corbelled walls. Looking at old photos of it, it bears some resemblance to the Galway oratory, as well as to other oratories in Dingle and Ivora. St. Brendan's house, also known as the priest's house, was probably a clerical residence and associated with the main church. The OPW have been working on it in recent years, and hopefully it'll be reopened soon. It is a large building, 3 stories high, measuring 11.7 meters by 7.15 meters externally. It was subdivided internally by the addition of a wall, and there was probably an internal staircase. There may also have been other buildings attached to it. Near this building is a holy well, St. Brendan's Well, which is likewise currently inaccessible. It is important to distinguish St. Brendan's house from another building in the 10-acre complex. This is the Chancellor's house. It's around half a kilometre away and on the other side of the main road. It's a large building, around 17.6 metres by 5 metres internally, though at one end it is considerably reduced. This was probably the residence of the Chancellor of Ardfert in the medieval period when he came to visit Kilmalkeldar. As stated above, this was his prebend. The size of both the chancellor's and priest's houses points to the wealth and importance of the entire complex. While most people visit Kilmalkeldar to see the magnificent doorway and the sundial, and possibly the ogham stone, there's so much else here. It's a large ecclesiastical complex with far more things: a leacht, a clochán, numerous crosses or inscribed stones, and a graveyard, which provides another perspective into recent history. While there is little information about the history of the site, it was one of many monastic sites in the 7th centuries. But, unlike most, it survived and thrived. The initial simple monastic site was transformed in the 11th century with the construction of a stone church with its magnificent doorway. Here, it has some similarities with Church Island in Lough Corrán in the next peninsula. Both of these sites would have been in the early medieval kingdom of Corca Duibhne, which at that time included both Ivora and Dingle, and both followed separate paths after the arrival of the Normans. Indeed, unlike Church Island, Kilmalkeldar survived into the early modern period and may even have survived the tumults and horrors of the 17th century. Today it is a ruin, but one which contains so many fragments of different pasts. It is like a jigsaw puzzle, or better, pieces of a series of jigsaw puzzles. In this way, it allows us to scratch among the past, as I like to say. We may never be able to put all these puzzles back together, but we can put parts of several of them, thereby shedding light on what has been lost. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and leave a comment below if you like. If you can, please support the channel by contributing to my Buy Me a Coffee account. Details are below. Thank you very much.